Before I do that, I want to make sure everybody's familiar with Celia Gonzalez. She's, I think you're acting Human Resources Director?
Never heard of her.
Yeah, sure, something like that.
All right.
Yeah, I'm the director. On good days, and acting.
Oh, you already started. That's all right. All right, so I'm calling to order this meeting of the Finance, Taxation, and Assessment Committee meeting. Present are committee members Mike O'Brien and Ms. Pliers. Also present is Councilmember Conti, President Corey Ellis, and Owusu Anani, Councilmember Anani. The purpose of today's, and also present is our Budget Director, Michael Wheeler, our Assessor, Trey Kingston. We have Treasurer Shanfar in the back, and Acting Human Resources Director, Celia Gonzalez, and we also thank Danielle Gillespie for being here as well. So, the two items for action at this meeting, the goal is to talk about these two items and then move on to beginning some further discussions about bonding. The primary things are, we have a resolution 70.101.19R that establishes the locally adjusted base proportions for homestead and non-homestead classes for real property tax purposes, and then also a resolution of the Common Council consenting to an adjustment in the salary for certain positions in the 2020 budget. We're going to start with resolution 70.101.19R, which is about the locally adjusted base proportions for the homestead and non-homestead classes. This is something that we have been doing every year. We have the authority to not do the same percentage for homestead and non-homestead properties when it comes to allocating the total tax levy. And we have been doing that for many years in accordance with local law passed in 1998. And we have before us a resolution that does not change the percentage allocation from last year. So I would like to turn it over to Mr. Kingston and Mr. Wheeler to talk a little bit about more about what this is about and why this recommendation is being made.
Okay, I think everyone received these documents. Do you guys have
yes.
those with you? I brought enough for everybody.
Yeah, well, I did have Michelle make copies for
Oh, you
everybody
did?
already.
Okay. Oh, good.
In our handy packet.
All right, so what we really want to look at is
Directly at the back of the package, so if you go on to the last three pages.
There you go, Trey. Those are mine.
I want your notes.
So really what we look at each year is our possible tax shares that we have and how that's going to affect the rates on homestead and non-homestead individually. What we've chosen to do the last several years, at least since I've been here, just because it's been the most effective way for us to not increase the rates for either homestead or non-homestead, is go with the 0%. Every percentage up towards equalization at 100% equalizes that rate, which means at 10%, 20%, 25%. And you can see that on the second sheet where I broke out what those adjustment changes are. Outside of that 0%.
When you say the second sheet, you are referring to
The
the
sh-
sheet
yep.
with no title that looks
Yes.
like this, guys.
Correct. And
On ours.
so essentially what happens is as you move towards 100%, the burden falls more on homeowners and less on the commercial properties. So as you move from 0 to 100, you can see that percentage change and that dollar change. The dollar change for homestead is per homes valued at $150,000, and for the commercial, its properties valued at $500,000.
We label that non-homestead,
Correct.
which also includes properties with 4 units or more.
Correct.
right?
Oh, yes, yes,
Yeah, 4 more.
yes.
It's always
Non-homestead.
tricky because, right, because you got to keep track of, okay, the garbage gets
Yeah.
collected for 4 units and less, the homestead, non-homestead rate applies for 4 units or more.
So, and when you look, there's the other sheet that we show generally during the budget process, and then again here is the Article 19 adjustment sheet, the differential tax rates that has all the formulas as to how the levy increases, the base proportions that we choose, and how that affects the rates, and shows you the percentage and the dollar change down below. Over the last few years, since 2016, we've increased the levy about 2.3 million, but at the same time, we've kept the rates for both homestead and non-homestead flat. We generally, as much as I think in an ideal world you would like to move the rates equal, this is what's the best formula for us for maintaining flat rates and not really increasing anyone's rates across the board. If you look at the sheet that I sent with the bar graph and the line graph showing the rates over the last several years, you'll see that this option at 0 has really allowed us to keep the rates flat for both homestead and non-homestead, while at the same time raising 2.3 million more in our tax levy.
And that is achieved because there is more property in the total assessed
Correct, the
property
roll,
that is
right.
subject to the tax.
More taxable
Thank
property,
you.
correct.
Short rate is that.
Right, so that's the path that we've chosen the last few years and the path that we're still continuing on. So we are recommending that we stay at the 0 base because there is some relief for homeowners, as small as it is, and a slight increase for non-homestead. But if you look at the rate, it still keeps them pretty much everyone at the same rates that they were at since 2014, 2015. So the intent here is to incrementally increase our revenue with our tax levy, but keep those rates flat is the goal, and why we've been choosing this option.
Mr. Kingston, do you have anything to add?
I mean, as what we've talked about so far, I think is really Mike's specialty. I'm not going to step on his toes. If we want to talk about the taxable values or there's any pointed questions towards, increases or decreases in the specific classes, I can speak to that.
All right. I do want to note that this particular chart, it's my understanding, is it this chart that is provided in terms of options provided by the Office of Real Property Tax Services for the state of New York? Is that?
So that's a chart is what I'm provided with, and every assessor throughout the state is a Excel spreadsheet with formulas plugged in on the back end. We fill in very minimal areas, like this year's current taxable homestead, non-taxable homestead, as well as
The total
assessed value
value.
and taxable value. The exempt values for each class, special franchise assessed values, which would be like Niagara National Grid, Time Warner, things of that nature. And this is automatically generated from that spreadsheet. So we're given a very rudimentary Excel sheet, and this is what it generates. So it is, I don't want to say done by New York State because we are actually responsible for inputting these figures, but it is given to us essentially through that nature by New York State.
And this 10% through 100%, my recollection is these increments are established in statute in New York State law, so that we can't vary and decide to do like 3% instead or something like
Correct.
that.
These are found in the subsections of 1903 of the Real Property Tax Law, which establishes the two-class system.
And I also want to note that whatever rate we choose in terms of the proportions also applies to the school district because it is coterminous, its boundaries are coterminous with the city itself.
Yes, it will apply to the 2020 school taxes.
2020 through 2021.
Yes.
Right.
Can we back up on that? So you're saying that the school district is bound by the proportion that I thought they always set their own and we only,
Well, remember I had been
Yeah.
asking questions about that, and then we finally, a bunch of us got together with the attorneys for the school district, and they agreed with me that they didn't have the authority to do that because their boundaries are coterminous with ours.
Okay.
The adjustments were only allowed for, and there's a lot of, in most school districts, they have, like if you're in the Guilderland School District, you might be in one of like 3 or 4 different taxing municipalities that have different rates because we have one, at least that's my understanding of the theory behind that. Any other questions? Does anybody have any questions? Mike?
Well, my question for Trey is, with the tapering down of a lot of IDA abatements, are we steadily increasing the total value of our taxable property?
Well, naturally, that would occur, but the issue with that is not all pilot agreements were entered into some fully come off, they go from 100 to 0, some taper down. In the last couple of years, we haven't seen many expire. I think last year, the only one that expired was the address.
The Alexander expired.
The Alexander, that's an Empire Zone exemption. So that's different, yes. But that tapers down, so we're not going to see a dramatic increase.
So I want to know what he was going to finish his sentence saying.
It was Jonathan, the address is slipping my mind, but it's Jonathan's Pizzeria, owned by Michael Ergo. That was the only one that I think came off pilot this past year. Not a substantial increase to the tax base, but we don't see dramatic increases, especially since most do taper. So we'll see a steady, slight increase for several years as they come back on the road. The same applies for the business improvement exemptions, such as the 485A, which everyone's probably familiar with, 45B. Those allow for steep exemption amounts in the beginning, and then they slowly tailor off until they're fully taxable.
The figures in front of all those properties are considered tax exempt. So it's still considered tax exempt properties for the purposes of this, but the revenue side is increasing on the pilot side. That's what the revenue increases you're seeing year to year right now. Not to the tax base.
But that's,
When you say the figures we see,
Exempt versus non-exempt properties.
okay.
but even on the pilots, can you say that they're increasing?
Yes. Yeah.
Other questions?
I provided you figures. I think
a question?
Mr. Franti?
Yeah, more long-term. So back in '98, when we opted into the homestead, after the full statewide assessment, the idea was that we were eventually going to transition to one tax rate. Is that still a policy goal, or is that something that's even doable?
It's always doable. It depends on what kind of burden you want to put on the taxpayers. But
The
homeowners,
homeowners,
yes. So,
the voting homeowners? No, that has nothing to do with
you
it.
know what? I still look at this every year, and the mayor gets, I give her all the options, and I think the goal is still to be open to getting there, but the opportunity at this point just hasn't presented itself, especially with last year with the trash fee coming on the homeowners as well, to put even more of a tax burden on them on top of that did not feel like the right move. But certainly if there was a change in the tax base in a way that made it more palatable and easier to equalize those rates, we would still want to take advantage of that.
We still have a sunset on this option, don't we?
It's 5 years. I believe it was renewed if it was 98, it was renewed in 18, and it'll expire in 23.
Other questions? I do want to note that these gentlemen have other obligations. Go ahead.
I know we've seen a lot of development in the city over the past couple of years, and it's only increasing. How would establishing this impact individuals who have units, basic units, or multi-unit properties in the city of Albany. Would this have any type of impact on those individuals?
I'm not sure I understand what you're asking.
How would what impact?
More so like with this increase for the homestead and non-homestead classes for properties, is there going to be any negative impact as it relates to like individuals that own like two families instead of? So we've seen several units that have gone up over the past couple of years in the city of Albany, and there's going to be I think 6,000 units right now for the big developers. Is there going to be an impact with this piece of this resolution? Is it going to have a negative impact on individuals that own like multi-unit households?
I think like Mike said, that,
With the rates
this
staying
stayed the
flat?
same.
No.
So
Minimal.
if I can just, I want to make sure that you understand, the homestead rate applies for properties with up to 3 units. So that's actually going down. It's going down, yeah, right, so it'll be minimal, right, a minimal impact really on that. For people who own properties with 4 units or more and all commercial properties, generally, the rate is going up. Yeah, and so for somebody that is assessed at $500,000, they will pay $89 more in taxes. So it depends upon what their assessment is and whether or not there's been any variation in their assessment, because some people do improvements or have changes in the uses that might change the assessed value of a particular property in between full value assessments.
I would say generally speaking, there's not going to be any difference to their tax bill unless their assessment has changed.
Well, there's $89 is something. Let me tell you, I hear it from the property owners who have 4, 5, 6 units, some on South Lake, et cetera, that, what?
No, South Lake, same.
Yeah, probably the same guy. You would probably hear from the same guy. But I've heard from others, other real estate agents.
Yeah.
That's it.
We've all heard from him. Okay, so any further questions? If not, I'd like to entertain a motion.
I will make a motion in favor of resolution 7101-19.
Second. So we're passing it out of committee with a positive
Yes.
recommendation. And any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. So that's unanimous. So that has passed out of committee. I don't know if you have an obligation at 6 and you're not really needed for the salary discussion. I don't know if you want to stay for that. We have the materials here, and Celia's going to go over the HR changes.
I can stay for a few minutes.
Yeah,
Just it was here
all
for
right.
this, sure.
All right, thank you
Thank
very
you.
much for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Troy.
So this is Resolution 80.112.19R. That is a basic resolution that, for which we tend to pass each year at the end of the year after the passage of the budget. We're not allowed to make salary adjustments for the most part. There's some little variations in the budget. Per our city charter. So when there are corrections to be made or other adjustments that departments have identified as being necessary after the budget has been introduced, then the way we take care of it is by doing a resolution. So this resolution is just a blank resolution, and then it attaches this page as attachment A. And it has a number of adjustments in it. I have asked the budget office to provide an attachment. The very next page is the 2020 budget salary and title changes, explanations, justifications. That goes through these items, and I consider this to be essentially the attachment to the sponsoring resolution, so we actually have for the record an explanation of what we are doing. So I will just briefly go over, I'm going to have Ms. Gonzalez go over the human resources and reorganization in a minute because that's the most significant change here, but I will go over some of these other changes. This provides for the deputy auditor to get a 3% raise over what he was making in 2019. That's being done at the request of the auditor. And I think it had been requested as part of the budget process. And you guys, since it's put forth in your documentation, have dropped any objection to that change.
We have.
Right. There's also a change for a senior payroll administrator to be a payroll administrator and a senior payroll, and then another one for the senior payroll administrator to be a principal payroll administrator. And my understanding of this is that the senior payroll, there is an experienced senior payroll administrator that they'd like to keep and compensate more, so they're moving that person up to be a senior payroll administrator. And at the same time, since there's a vacancy in one of the senior payroll administrator positions, that is being decreased to be just an entry-level payroll administrator position.
That's correct.
And so those are increases, an increase and a decrease that are the same. So these are budget neutral, and it is approximately a 6% increase for the person and 6% decrease for the incoming person. Any questions about that from anybody? I'm going to skip over the human resources.
Discard. Mike, will these be reflected then in the final, in the printed budget book?
That's really up to, how you guys feel about that.
So I think we did that
Technically, the
last
book is
year.
adopted now. This is a post-adoption change. Do you want this to be in the 2020 book with an asterisk that this was made post-adoption?
So in 2000, for the 2018 budget, we had quite a few changes, and we did agree at that time that when we are making these adjustments, it's appropriate to have that included in the printed budget as long as we're passing it before the end of the year. And I note that last year we did the same thing was done. However, that did not, when Nick was asking me the same question, I saw that we didn't have the little notation that it includes adjustments made through the Common Council and the ENA. So the 2018 adopted budget has that notation, I think on the second page or inside cover or something. And I think that that's appropriate to make it clear that there was a subsequent, and I think that it even noted what the ordinance number was, or the resolution number was, making those particular changes. I want to note for the record, Ms. Fahey is here. So you have the documents? Okay. So is everybody okay with what I just talked about in terms of these being incorporated into the 2020 budget, printed budget document, with it making it clear it was a subsequent adjustment? I guess skip over human resources just briefly. I want to note item 5, or that is included in the attachment A, is simply, and there had been an omission for one of the clerk typist positions for a 1% increase. We are including in here, and so this is correcting that inadvertent omission. That person is entitled to the 1% raise like everybody else who is non-union in the budget. We have also included a 3% increase for our senior legislative aide in this budget. That was through discussions with the leadership. I don't know if anybody wants to talk about that. Mr. Kimbrough, do you?
No, we're fine. We're offering the increase based on workload and the job she's been doing.
And then on the back of that page, we have 3 adjustments for the water fund. One is the commissioner. There was an omission of the 1% increase. that he is entitled to. There is a change in a title for an accounting assistant. This was simply, I think, a typo, to an administrative assistant position that we identified when we were looking at potentially adjusting that person's salary for 2019, the end of 2019 also. But that request has been dropped.
Correct.
And then the mapping technologist, this is about a $6,000 increase, and the commissioner, somebody has left that position, and they would like to advertise the position at the higher rate of $60,000, which is about the middle of the range in terms of, and actually on the lower end of the range in terms of other mapping technologists working for the state and Onondaga County were provided as comparables. Glassdoor, they also noted that Glassdoor also has it higher. So this is not somebody in the position they wanted to be able to recruit a higher quality candidate for that. Any questions about that? All right, with that, we're going to talk a little bit about the human resources reorganization. Ms. Gonzalez contacted me shortly after the budget came out and let me know that this was something that they were very interested in getting done before the start of the 2020 year, and I met with them to go over what they were looking at. This again is something that is budget neutral. It does involve the creation of a number of civil service titles with full descriptions that we've been provided. And with that, I'll turn it over to you to talk a little bit more about why you think this is necessary.
Well, thank you. It's my pleasure to be here back in City Hall and talk to you about my favorite topic, which is innovation and creativity in human resource management. And so I've been here since July and working with my staff, which I don't have enough of. And that's just a little jab in my but we've taken a look at what is it that we're doing right and what is it that we're doing wrong and how we effectuate change. So we were divided into two departments, one that just dealt with benefits and one that just dealt with civil service, and no one dealt in the big, big picture of human resource management. And so we were missing a training piece, that collection piece, those types of things. And so I've decided, or we decided as a staff, that the best way to address this is to make everyone a generalist. In other words, everyone learn their jobs. We'll have experts in each targeted area, whether it's benefits or training or outreach or recruitment, because all those pieces fall under the rubric of HR management. So we took the old silos down. We're making everyone generalist. We developed our title series in relationship to the state of New York, which may offer, not that I want to lose my staff, but it'll give them more of an opportunity as HR generalists to transfer. In fact, they can cross the street right now.
Now,
and
I think I'm going to change my vote.
No, I don't want to lose it. I have to tell you that they're both of my generalists, three, are going to college right now. So they all signed up for the semester, and so they're looking towards the future, and I want that staff to grow. An educated staff is an effective staff. They're creative, they're innovative, and they don't get stuck in what used to be, but what is going to come to be. And that's why we're changing the HR staff and our focus over the next year and in the future.
So essentially what you're doing is you're creating 3 positions that are human resource generalists, 1, 2, and 3.
It's a career ladder. I'm looking at that across the board because we just can't have nowhere to grow.
That's right.
You know, we have entry people, we bring them in, we train them, and then they can go on to the next level. And it gives us longevity and consistency and lets people stay with us a bit longer instead of jumping around and trying to find other positions. So that's the goal. Yes, sir.
I get 2 questions.
Okay.
Then is there an automatic time progression, like if somebody serves as a human resource generalist 1 for a couple of years, do they automatically then graduate?
No, I wish we had that. I mean, that's the way we could do it, that so many years you serve in a position and you will go up. Usually what happens in civil service is that you serve in a position until it opens. Another position opens, and then you compete in that arena.
So I want to call everybody's attention to, there's 2 charts in about the middle of the packet of information that you have. One shows the organizational chart for 2019, and then the other one shows it for 2020 and what is proposed in this reorganization. And it
Wait, so
So in fact, these generalists might spend part of one day working on civil service, and then as the need arises, might also work
Sure,
on.
they'll be trained in both arenas.
Okay.
Whether it's,
Okay.
you know, we always say benefits and civil service. But there are many, many different things we do in HR. One is recruitment, outreach, training,
Yeah.
data collection, data analysis. I mean, we monitor how many people are going to retire in the next 20 years. What does that mean to our workforce? You know, how is that going to impact us when we bring people in, as we see so many people leaving? So all those functions fall under the human resource management umbrella.
I get a follow-up question related to my first question about automatic progression.
Sure.
Doesn't that happen within the police department and within the fire department? If they're in grade a certain amount of time?
I'm pretty sure I mean, I think it's semi-automatic. I think, but I don't,
They also have more
I mean-
turnover than a
Yeah,
lot of them.
it's like 5 years to top pay. It's like you get in, you start in the academy, once you get out, you get
But you're in the
paid
same
That's a
type?
union
You're not, I
negotiated
mean,
thing,
there's
isn't it?
different grades within.
It is, it's,
within-
yeah, those
within
grades are
that.
negotiated within.
Yeah, they are, it's
contracts.
differences.
Right. They have a salary grade level that's negotiated in their union contracts.
Yeah.
We don't have that.
Right, but if
We're
it's
non-union staff.
But if it's a motivational idea, I suppose it could be adopted.
And here's,
for-
and we can,
Look
and
towards
here's,
the
and,
future.
and this is really what we've been looking for our HR department to do since I've been here, really is because we've really encouraged the departments to look at creating steps and ladders within their organizations. But I feel like that really had to, for it really to stick and move, it had to be driven out of HR. And we just never had the organization properly set up there to make that happen. I think this is really a big step towards us moving towards all those non-union positions where we can set up grades and we can set up career ladders and we can create opportunities for people that historically have not had it. So I think this is really, as it may seem simple to many, but this is, for us, is groundbreaking, and it is going to be a catalyst towards moving where we need to go as an organization.
Take this model and we can duplicate it
the
throughout
other
different
thing-
departments.
Yep.
the other thing I want to note here is, it's not a big department, like you say, you know.
We're not a big
No.
department.
So there's 6 employees below the human resources director, and then a senior project manager essentially is, and then maybe some interns if they're lucky to have people who are, you know, really.
We have a paid intern and a volunteer intern, yeah.
So if you have essentially 2 people in benefits and 2 people in civil service, and one's out sick and the other one's on vacation in civil service, who's going to take calls and follow through on the work, et cetera? So this, you know, eliminates that kind of basic problem. And
Was there turnover in staff that allowed you, because I know the assistant human resources administrator was making 62, now there is no person making 62.
That's right.
So there was some turnover?
No, yes, we had an employee retire.
Okay.
So that opened up that opportunity for us.
that's part of how they're making this budget neutral, is by bringing up the salaries of 2 people, but both of those salaries are
I
lower.
see that, I see that. Thank you.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. I
We're
mean,
trying to, this model works for us, we could duplicate this in different places for
Yeah.
our non-union
And
employees.
Judy's exactly right. The cross-training component of this is huge for all the departments. So that No one is the keeper of all knowledge. When that person leaves or moves on, or it makes it almost impossible to duplicate that same service, having this kind of cross-training where everyone is a generalist, especially at the lower levels, really, not only do you get to see what they do best and where they excel, but you also have coverage for all components of your department at that level, so that when there is turnover, you don't feel it as hard as we have in previous years.
So, but there's only one person that's retiring? Like,
Just one.
after this budget is adopted, how many people won't have their jobs no more in HR?
None.
No, just will be one that's retiring?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Right.
I like it.
But the goal
Which
is
is
next
part of
year,
the
when we
reason
come back, we'll
why-
have
why I
another opportunity to
supported
torque it.
moving forward now, because they also want to advertise for an permanent HR director, and they wanted to do this reorganization
You mean you're
before
not
they
going to
bring
be
some of the
permanent HR director?
I'd love to stay here. If you could change the weather, I'd be happy.
Well, we do.
But
Every April
every
changes.
April, I
Powerful body.
I'm committed to seeing this through for a while. And, I made a commitment to the staff and the management team to move this agenda forward, to create a new HR vision for the city of Albany. I live here, I raised my family here, this place is very important to me, and here's an opportunity for me to do something good that I feel good about and the staff feels good about. And I see change coming for us. And I see more people coming and talking to us about what we can help them with, which is a different approach. For many years, we were the no organization. We're not that any longer. We're the trusted advisor, that's what I like to call us. Come to us, if we can't figure it out that day, we'll get back to you, but not in a month. Okay?
That's the question. Oh, sorry.
Yes?
With this new organizational chart, as relates to like civil service, who will be able to assist these civil service questions? Everyone?
Everyone.
Everyone?
That's what you call shared responsibilities across
That's at least the
training.
goal. They need to do the training.
To do the training, we train the staff. Staff that knows civil service can be a buffer for the people that are learning it.
Are people working on policies and procedure manual? for
Yes.
Some of the, yeah.
Something we didn't have. Something
Yeah,
that we
I
just
know.
started.
I know.
Policy and procedure. Part of codifying what an HR department is that makes us consistent throughout the city. If everyone is doing process differently, it creates havoc for us. And it delays hiring, posting, recruiting, every aspect of what we do. So it's all being done right now with this little army that I have of very diligent workers. And they're excited about learning different things. Sometimes you just have to show an opportunity and people can go to it. You get stuck in a model over the years here. 5 years, 6 years, you get wedded to a normal behavior that's not really good or normal. It's just what I accept it to be.
Well, I'm concerned about the normal being a lot of turnover in HR. And
We're good. We have our staff pretty much, they're not old people like me. They're young millenniums. They want to grow in their positions. They may leave us someday. I'd be happy if that happened, because then they can say to people, here's a place to go work if you want to start out. That would be wonderful for the city of Albany to say, that should be your employer of choice.
So when I met with Celia, there were 3 people that I met with, and 2 will be the journalists.
Yes.
And I was very, very impressed with their knowledge and their eagerness to do the work, and some of their descriptions about the enormity of the number of transactions that they have and what they're dealing with was impressive. So I'm glad that this is something that they have bought into, they have invested in, and have been working on. They can take some pride in the product and the result and help transform the organization.
Sometimes we get into a situation where we create technology is going to resolve our problems. We went to eGov and said, how great is eGov? It does everything. It's a portal. How magical is this? Well, the year before we did eGov, we received 1,000 applications for jobs. The year we instituted eGov, we received 8,000. Who does 8,000 reviews? The same people, the same staff that did the 1,000 reviews. So the task became 8 times as much as originally planned for. And technology does that.
So Judy, are you looking for a motion?
I am looking for a motion.
One question, wait. Just two actually. So the human resource generalist is the same as the state. Sorry, I just want to have my own personal information.
Okay.
It's consistent with the state general.
Yes.
As one position.
Yes.
And the last question is just also, can you give us any update as it relates to like police exams that was taken and also?
Sure. Sure, the police exam was taken. We had 896 people apply for the exam. 850 people were approved. They took the exam.
850 people were approved
To take the exam. 600 people passed the exam. We're in the process. We just received a list last week. Now we have to verify all the scores on the list. That list then goes to the Civil Service Commission at a special meeting that we're going to move quickly on this because we want to fill these positions. So we're going to hold an early January meeting to verify, approve the list, and then we begin the canvass. So we met with the police
I
department
have an
today.
update to that as well. Everything should be satisfied and formalized with the lease for the new building. We negotiated for the new training facility. The renovations should be starting hopefully this month, by the end of the month, and we should be ready to train a class between 40 and 60. It looks like March or April.
Yeah, mid-March.
And we can have,
Mid-March,
and we can have
middle of April.
and we can do 2 classes in a year, so we should get our numbers back up to a normal force by the end of 2020.
Wait, you said up to 60?
Between 40 and 60, they have the space for.
Yeah, I've been talking.
Now, you all know that everybody has to pass a physical.
Yep, that's.
You do lose a lot along
The
the way.
background check. All those things have to happen. People fall out. We're having a terrible time with people taking these exams and not passing the physical. And it's very, very, very difficult.
Yeah, because I think we had close to that 800 for the last round too, and
Is the
not
training
many
facility
made it.
going to have the kind of equipment to do the tests that people could then practice on?
That would be, I don't
Like
know.
treadmills or whatever?
Oh yeah, they're going to have a full gym, and not like a membership kind of gym, but they will have all the training equipment within the facility, lockers, showers, a
we could
big training
utilize-
room, offices. It's a nice
If we
facility.
could utilize community centers in their gyms to open it up and have more people
Yep.
practice how to pass the test.
Thank you for being here.
The fire department, thanks, Mike.
Yep.
The fire department did their CPAC, their training, passed their physical, and they couldn't get past the stairwell. The stairs, they couldn't climb the stairs.
For years.
Because they bodybuild.
Yes.
And when they bodybuild, they can't run.
But for years, when I was on the council 12 years ago, when I met with the chief, both chiefs, I said, you guys can track where people are failing, then we have a better sense of what we need to do as a city to help them along if we can. If we find out people are failing the physical, maybe we're going to say, okay, provide some training for that. If people are failing the psychological, or are people failing the final interview? Those things, if you track it, then we have some sense of where we're going.
Sure.
Just telling people to take a test, that's why I was never one of those persons to do that. The test is not where you can find out where are we missing people. You have to find out, during the whole process, where is the majority of people we're missing, and that's tracking.
And that's what we plan on doing.
Thank you.
Data analysis is critical
That's
to an
right.
HR department.
That's it.
Everything we plan for has to be a metric measurement.
That's right.
If I could tell you that yesterday we did 100 transactions on buyouts for health benefits, or we had to reassess 1,400 retirees, and we had to inform them of changes. All those processes, we need to collect data on. How many people actually signed up? How many people did we meet in recruitment? If I go to 5 recruitment fairs, And we do this all the time. We go to recruitment fairs, we go, oh, we went to the recruitment fair, we set up, we spent all this money. How many people did you actually do? Well, 3. 3 people. I saw 3 people in 2 hours. It's not effective. So how do we revisit that and use social media and other technological, and just going to a high school. I mean, we should have absolute training in high school. That should be it. We start too late. If we're trying to grow fire people and,
That's exactly
and
right. If you're trying.
police, if we're trying to grow them, then start in high school.
That's exactly.
And prepare them in high school to take the test, to pass the physical. If they decide they don't want to do it when they graduate, fine, that's their choice. But give them the opportunity to know what this is.
All right, wait, guys. Okay, I am going to cut this little section.
The leader is speaking. How do we execute this? Like, people are talking about
We're gonna do the next meeting,
Listen, you guys can set up a meeting to talk to Celia. The purpose of this is whether or not we're going to approve the resolution for the salary adjustments. We appreciate so much what you are doing, and obviously people are very excited about it and eager to see us be more successful in ours. However, the question before us is, what are we going to do about resolution 80.1?
So are you asking for a motion?
I sure am.
I will offer a motion for favorable motion for 81, 12, and 18.
Second. Any further discussion from committee members only?
No, I'm good with it, and I hope they can make it kind of a ladder where people put their time in, you're guaranteed a...
Okay.
So with that, all in favor? Aye. And that passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Thank you very
Thank
much
you.
for being here.
Thank you for having me. Made a very happy Saturday. Very happy.
All right. So, we have a meeting scheduled for December 19th to talk about bonding ordinances, and we've done some discussion of the 21 bonding ordinances that we have. Last year, I provided the committee with an estimate of where we are and where we're going with regard to the bonding if we approve the entire request. And last year, I noted that we are looking down the road, especially with regard to in 2025 through 2030 of having very high debt service payments accumulating over time if we stick to the schedule that we've been on. Last year, that discussion resulted in us reducing bonding ordinance approvals by $2.5 million. I've provided you with a chart using, to some extent, the assumptions that Mr. Shanafar has provided us with. You want this? Oh, you know what? Excuse me. That might be my are these?
I think there's more right there. 50?
Yeah.
Isn't it behind?
Is it included in here?
It's
Okay.
the last, it's separate.
Oh, I was,
package.
yeah.
Got it.
So these are my charts that I have.
It's behind every single one.
Yeah, okay. So, so what this chart shows is on the left-hand column, it is the debt payment that is in our current budget. The next column takes the $29.7 million that we have thus far, that we have banned this year, and to give us some idea of where we would be at if we were to bond that over 12 years at 2%, which was an interest rate, 12 years at 2.05%, which was an interest rate that Treasurer Shanafar suggested would be appropriate to use in estimates. And then what I show is what the total is, less debt service associated with landfill. This is whenever we're looking at our debt policy and the debt service, we always removed the bond payments for the landfill. So
Makes money.
because it makes money. And so then the fourth column over, 1, 2, 3, 4, the fourth column of dollar amounts would be the net anticipated bonding with the landfill. The next column makes the assumption that if we were to bond the $26.1 million that is currently requested this year that we bond, and do that over a 10-year period, and I used a 10-year period partially because that is what we tend to have as a maximum maturity for most of our bonding, especially once we have like a year or two of banning, et cetera. And 2% interest rate is used there. What I have done there is because we have about $8 million worth of projects this year, we have projects for which about $8 million of it is reimbursable. And I have gotten information from talking to treasurers and city managers elsewhere that when they're implementing DRI or the tips, it is often 3 years before you get payment. So for the first 3 years, it is the full amount, and then after that, it drops out $8 million and continues on with the assumption that we have the 10-year, continuing with the 10-year pay down. And then the last column then takes what is in the 5-year plan and assumes, again, a 10-year payback. So the next 2 years, we have $18 million in anticipated borrowing. And then the year after that would be 15, and the year after that would be 14. And then I've made the assumption, because to get a complete picture, that it's going to be $15 million of borrowing, which is on the low side of what we have been doing since I have been on the council. And as you can see there, and also, so I note that essentially starting in 2024, I've made some notations in the second note down here that the debt service limit would be at about 18.5 million, moving up to about 19.4 million through 2034. That's based upon an assumption that the budget will go up by about 0.5% per year, which is conservative, but that is kind of like where we have been at up until now. So we can assume that it'll go up, maybe we can jiggle, play with that number. If it were to go up by 1% per year, it's really not going to make that much of a difference when you're looking at the fact that from 2025 through 2031, we're going to be $2 to $3 million over the likely debt policy limits. I want to note that I played with this to look at, well, what happens if we inserted in there then 12-year pay downs on it. What happens is you then wind up with a year or two at the upper end of the chart, maybe coming within or being close to being within the debt service limits. But then what happens is you wind up adding over almost $2.5 million on the end of this chart. And so then 2032 and 2033 wind up being over the likely debt policy ratio. So I wanted to, this is, I mean, when I obsess about, $26 million in borrowing, or even the 17, even if we were to count just for that for which after reimbursement, when I think about that being a lot of money, this is how I work the numbers. I don't just approximate eventually I need to say, is it, something real, or is, if I work the numbers, or is it, something that we can probably get by on. I want to note for people something very interesting about what is going to happen next year also. That if you look at our current, up on the left-hand side under 2020, the second column over, we have $23.6 million worth of debt service in 2020. And if you look at the column 3 over, after landfill, it's at 19.095 with the full borrowing. That subtracts about $1 million for landfill. But bottom line is, we're looking at we've gone up quite a bit, about $4.5 million this 1 year in 2020, and next year we will be dropping by about $4 million, which gives us, I want to say, more potential flexibility in our budget. I will tell you that one of the things I'm very aware of is in 2020 we are negotiating contracts, and that will impact are likely to impact both 2020 and 2021. By my rough calculations, we're probably looking at about $2.5 to $3 million by 2021 being embedded in the budget. And that would include some amount of increase for APD. It does not include the retroactive, which Mike Wheeler has basically said he's anticipating that to the extent we wind up having to pay retroactive in any APD contract, that we will likely have to take that out of our unappropriated fund balance. So we're looking at a $9.1 million unappropriated fund balance currently. We can expect that to decrease significantly if we start paying retroactive for the unsettled contracts going back to the beginning. I think it's the beginning of 2017. So 2017, 2018, 2019.
So that's fire in place?
No, because fire is current to the end of this year. All of our contracts are current to the end of this year except for APD. And APD, remember that settlement? I believe that settlement was it 2014, 2015, or 2015, 2016?
That was 14 and 15, but I'm not sure.
I think that you're right. So we would have 16, 17, 18, and 19 that we're looking at for retroactive, with a compounded increase in those salaries that then directly impacts the 2020 budget potentially and the 2021 budget moving forward. So while that's a nice amount of a drop, that is something to be talked about in terms of, can we move some things to the operating side, which then helps with our debt policy issues, not only now for this year, but in the future when we're looking at this column over on the right-hand side. And one of those that I think is a huge candidate for us to look at doing that with, again, is the police vehicles. I will tell you that, I have the article from the Troy, from the Albany Times-Union talking about Troy and the OSC counseling them that they shouldn't be bonding for that. I had a conversation with the Watertown city manager who has experience in a lot of different places. And in the course, because we were talking about their capital plan, Richard pointed out that and I wanted to ask him some questions about how they do capital planning. And when I mentioned that we do APD vehicles in our budget, he's like, I'm shocked that the auditors haven't, cited you guys, for that. And because it is here's the thing with the vehicles. You borrow, let's say, $1 million this year, you borrow another $1 million next year, you borrow another $1 million the next year, and you keep on borrowing $1 million, all you're achieving is really, aside from getting over the initial hump of how do you get the cash value, all you're doing is you're paying money in interest for that, because whether you're paying debt service out of your operating budget or whether you're paying for those cars directly, it's $1 million. The difference being debt service is $1 million plus the 2% or 3%, so that is something that I think that we need to be looking at. I have also provided on this document an explanation of why do we need to do better planning, why do we need to do scrutinized bonding requests, and a frustration of mine and other people's is the amount of money that continues, and I think to exist in accounts that are not being utilized. And sometimes that's frankly, people are putting in the request because they're seeing the need coming down the pike, but they don't have a specific plan. Sometimes it's because they're overestimating because they want to make sure they don't cut short on it. But Mr. Shanafar provided us with a lovely spreadsheet that I passed on to everybody for where we are with regard to all of the accounts, and thanks to Mr. Riley and is it Ron Vogel for that. And out of that, I took out anything having to do with 2019 because people that just got that funding, you don't execute necessarily even purchases on like a fire truck. It takes a year to get that, etc. So I took out all of the 2019. I took out everything having to do with the landfill because the landfill is a special animal with regard to what DEC requires us to be doing and the ongoing need for restoration, although there's some professional fees and stuff in there that I wonder about. But just take that out of there. Take the fire department, the fact that they have from 2018 a fire truck expenditure out of there. And what we have is $4.8 million sitting in accounts for which we are paying interest and paying down principal every year out of our operating budget for those funds. And that doesn't count a few other items. Total, I want to mention to people, there's $13 million worth of bonding authorizations that have not yet been borrowed on. And I did include in this chart that I provided you with an assumption that $7.3 million of that will actually be borrowed against. There are things like the streetlights, $3.3 million that I have not included because I don't think it's likely. But I felt like we need to account for that money in some way. So this is about half of what has been authorized. It includes things like we know that streets, $2 million of that is for street reconstruction, which we've asked Randy to go ahead and utilize this year. There's money in there for, there's $1 million that is unborrowed for buildings. And basically we're looking at the building request this year and going 1.39 million. You have 1.6 million sitting in accounts if you use that prior authorization on it. So I have included, so that's at least $3 million right there that I can account for. I picked and chose some of this because I think it's likely that it's going to be borrowed probably in the next, whether it's 1 to the next 5 years. I think it's a reasonable assumption. So with that said, last year we did a chart like this. The second chart, what I've done is a cover sheet for it now. to help us with where we are at. But this chart is kind of like the master summary of all bonding requests. I will note that I came up with 26.106, and I re-added last night, rechecked my math, and it's actually 120.
Is that on here?
Yeah.
On the very bottom.
Very bad.
So it's actually 126.
Oh, yeah.
26. So, we have, and my goal here now is just to give people, lay this out for people so you have something to think about before we're meeting to actually talk about all of the bonding. But I also want to see if there are specific questions that people have, they want us to go back to the departments and ask questions on, so that we are prepared for potentially making some decisions on the 19th. So the cover sheet is now my trying to consolidate in one place where we are at. We had discussions in the Finance Committee about, yes, we want, the street reconstruction, sidewalks, playgrounds, and Lincoln Park reconstruction are all consistent with the priorities that the council wrote to the mayor about prior to the budget. And then we had also discussed the fire apparatus. They have now provided us with a very clear schedule of replacement and need that we've been following along with the last 2 to 3 years. And I think people felt as though it's appropriate to go ahead and bond the $1.35 million that has been asked there. We did think that the city buildings was justified for $500,000, and noting that there was $600,000 in accounts existing that they could use for that. So they only needed the essentially $500,000. And then when I got your chart, I saw that they have over $1 million left in authorized bonding. So I'm not sure why we would go ahead and authorize more bonding at this and have more money sitting in accounts unexpended potentially.
And that applied to the Morton Avenue building, the holding cell.
No. This was their firehouses with HVAC, their firehouses with window replacements. So there were other requests. APD had a separate request for $300,000 that they didn't really provide us with a lot of information on. We asked them to get together with engineering and get back to us and provide us with further justification on. And frankly, we haven't. APD has been lacking in justification for and details on all of its borrowing. So let me see. So going back, so that city buildings was a variety of buildings, HVC, some concrete work, some work on the bathrooms in City Hall here, and a lot of window replacements. I think that kind of summarizes it. And it was $1.399 million, which included already a 20% contingency and $125,000 for architectural services. So Randy noted that from one of those bonds, from a prior year's request, $245,000 was allocated to APD expressly. So even deducting that from the $1.67 million that's available in the bonding accounts, along with what has not yet been borrowed, even subtracting for that, he would still have more than the $1.4 million left for him to do what he's requesting this year. And again, when we're looking at where do we bring our bonding in line with our debt policy, that seems to me to be an appropriate cut. I'm not asking for us to make a decision, just mentioning that. APD IT infrastructure was also something that we agreed to last year. They justified and agreed. It's really an antiquated system that they're looking to replace completely. And we kind of gave them the green light, and we can't really stop funding midstream on that. They will be getting about $500,000 in reimbursement on a project that I think is about $2.8 million that we're paying for over 4 years. So the council felt like we should go ahead and go forward with that. And then the remaining bonds were ones that we held for consideration. Roadway striping was one that we're looking at potential reduction because of Maria College may be contributing. DTS vehicles, $3 million is on the high side. They also have $200,000 in existing accounts. We have the APD patrol vehicles, $1.375 million requested, which $340,000 are for special use vehicles that they did nothing other than provide us with a list of vehicles and prices and didn't tell us why. And that also was not in last year's 5-year plan to be replaced this year. Yes, Mr. Anani.
This might be more Phil. So the police department, they have seizure money. Why they can't use some of that money towards some of these request vehicles, request and bonds that they're asking for?
Where is I think that's a good question to be asking them.
I don't think that the green book has.
It has to do with something with public safety. I think they can use it if it's so. That's just from my understanding. I might be wrong. If it has to deal with public safety, they can use it. So,
I mean, they couldn't use it necessarily for a DGS vehicle, certainly a police vehicle.
a police vehicle, yeah.
So you don't think that you've been
This
through
reminds
that?
me of a discussion we had a while back. Prior council were dealing with seizure money and what it was used for, could be used for. But
I thought there were limitations.
I don't think you can use it for ongoing operating expenses or routine expenses or things like that. But you look into it.
Oh, but we consider this a capital expense. We can use it for that.
Well, capital, I mean,
It's
it's,
first step, asking them how much they have in the account. I don't have offhand, but
yeah.
I don't necessarily.
I'm not trying to.
You want to add something?
But
I'll take care of that, yeah. So I note that we did get confirmation from Mr. Milano as a result of our discussions that for bridges, the $500,000 requested is not needed in 2020.
Okay.
And we had, as a committee, kind of been inclined to eliminate the $300,000 requested by APD for the building improvements at this time. Some of what they are asking for, again, seems like it should be funded on out of an operating budget because it is a little bit more maintenance kind of costs. But the presentation on that was weak, and we asked them to come back with us with more details on that as to the need for each one of those. So then we had 9 projects that are predominantly planning department projects for which there is various levels of reimbursement. And what I have done, I thought to be helpful, is broken out what is the total request and what is ultimately the city's share for each one of those. I think for the projects for which there's 100% reimbursement, I'm not sure why we would.
Chop.
Right. The only thing I will note.
No,
What?
100%.
You're not sure why you would
Cut
chop them?
Oh,
Right, yeah, cut them, yeah. Even though we have to come up with, for example, for Tivoli improvements, upfront we need to come up with $1 million. And also for the $250,000 for the illuminated pedestrian underpass for the Livingston Avenue.
May I interject for a moment? Just so everyone is aware, usually with the reimbursable projects, we tend to do short-term borrowing, the banning of those, in anticipation of getting a reimbursement and not actually fully bonding or borrowing from them down the road. Just so everyone is aware, that's generally how the process works. There are times, however, where we do have to borrow the money up front, and we'll even go into a bond to do that as opposed to a ban. But most of the time, it's usually, most of the projects here, especially the shorter-term ones, are really going to be 1 or 2 year bans, and that's going to be it. We're done. And the figures here won't be ultimately realized for those particular projects because it won't be going out to a bond.
However,
But it's a moving target.
I want to emphasize that my chart already takes into consideration that A, you will be paying interest on it, and B, you need to pay principal pay down
Yes.
for 2 to 3 years. And then what I do is I drop the $8 million out of that column because it is about $8 million worth of reimbursement between these projects and the TIPS money. So that's how I'm dealing with it. It's still, now again, I'm using a 10-year pay down because we have things like the police vehicles that are a 3-year pay down, and then we have something like the Tivoli improvements would probably potentially be arguably a 15 to 20 year PPU, but you usually don't bond more than 15 years, maybe 12, at the real outside, which is why I'm using a pay down of 10 years. Is that seem like
That's a conservative, an appropriately conservative figure to use.
Right. So that's the problem is this, when you look at those others, it already drops out the extra money for the reimbursement. This is why I lose sleep at night sometimes.
What is BOA/LWRP?
Brownfield cleanup, kind of like figuring out appropriate alternative uses. This is a study of both this and the Hudson River Waterfront Gateway. Now, Chris did a great job, not during our budget presentation, but subsequently sending us a description of each one of these projects on like one sheet, kind of like what Watertown does for its capital budget. And it talks about, in each case, here's what the total cost is, here's what the reimbursement is, here's what our share is, and here's what this project is about, kind of thing. So for this one and also the Hudson River Waterfront Gateway, these are both like predominantly planning exercises. They don't result in those brownfields actually being cleaned up. They result in a plan for what we might do with something. It's kind of like, what might you do with that lovely warehouse building? Kind of, We have other properties along the waterfront, in the waterfront area, in the downtown corridor, which are potentially problematic. And I think some of this might include some of the stuff in the south end, as well as in the North Albany area, and maybe some along Broadway, etc. I think some might be along whatever Huck Finn's is on, Erie Boulevard or something like that kind of thing. And I will note that next year there's borrowing for that as well. $300,000 for the Hudson River Waterfront Gateway and another $150,000 for the BOA. So it's nice that we're looking at reimbursement on both of those. I personally would rather get rid of 787 and focus on that as opposed to doing studies for
Don't bring your facts, logic, and reason to the discussion.
So So, so the question is, does anybody have any, so we basically don't have questions on the ones that are 100%. Is there other information that people want for the other ones? And again, we already have some information. The question is, I will tell you that one of my questions about Maiden Lane, and this is a project that is only 51% reimbursable, and I don't mean to be turning my nose up at 51% reimbursement, but some of the improvements seem to be very geared towards accommodating needs of people in and around the federal courthouse. And so part of my question is, why wouldn't we look to them to provide some funding?
The federal government?
The federal government, yeah, to...
Good luck.
We don't lack for good ideas.
Similarly, we have the South End Connector Trail is only 50% reimbursable.
No, but Judy,
They've done,
sorry. As related to that, that's a good point. Why don't we actually write a letter to the congressman, at least, requesting some type of...
we don't have time to write a letter.
But
I mean, in terms of us making decisions about this.
What I'm saying is it realistic to ask them if there's a way that the federal government can help us out with this?
That won't go anywhere. You have to be specific about what it is. And planning department looks at these stuff in federal grants all the time as well. So unless you have something that you're specifically asking for, just the general letter is not going to...
Let me ask Chris Spencer about that as a question, so we at least have a response. South End Connector Trail, 50%. So my understanding is that all the prior funding has taken care of the construction of the path itself, and I believe that was supposed to be completed in the fall, but I don't know. And that this is for additional, I want to say, amenities. But the thought occurred to me, didn't the county cover a lot of the cost for the rail trail?
Oh, yeah.
I believe so.
So if this is connecting the rail trail to the Mohawk Trail, Mohawk River Trail.
So have they reached out to the counties, what you're wondering?
That's good, yeah. Definitely not cash that.
What?
They got money.
They have money, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, they're giving people a tax cut.
Yeah.
And it's
Giant
not...
raisins.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Giant enormous raisins.
Oh, yeah.
So Judy, are you gonna add for that too?
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is not, there's money in the budget next year also for $350,000 for that. So out of $550, our, contribution is going to be $225,000, which is not huge, but every little bit counts in terms of, where we're at with this entire situation. Are there other questions that people have about any of these?
No, thank you for all your work.
There's no, and then there's the Skyway project that we had a presentation on. I still have a question about why we're doing improvements to state property, essentially.
Well, weren't they going to meet with them and determine the parameters of that, the maintenance?
Yeah, but here's the thing that, so Brian talked about that. Usually when you are doing bonding and authorizing a project, you not only know what your capital costs are, but you also know what your operating costs are. There's an issue with floating and passing and then floating a bond for a project that then the bondholders anticipate are going to move forward, and we still don't know what our obligation is on the true cost of that. But I took another step back And I'm like, okay, but basically what he was saying, I'm realizing, this was, as I'm looking at this situation over the weekend and, struggling with it. Bottom line is, where's the precedent for a municipality improving and maintaining state property? The agreement is, what he's talking about in terms of an agreement is actually having state continue to own it in the same way the state has continued to own the Mid-Hudson Bridge walkway. And the state maintains that. They improved it, they maintain it, etc. And
That's a state park, isn't it?
It is a state park.
I think they were going to be meeting with them soon. Maybe we can get an update from Brian.
If I'm correct, I believe during that meeting, he did say that the MOU, he is going to bring it back to the council to take a look at it, just to make some type of amendments to it. So I don't know if that still stands. I'm okay with that.
I don't think he gave us a document.
I will ask Brian.
Judy, like, you want the old Owusu
What?
back? You want the old Owusu back?
I want to own what?
Okay,
The old
Owusu.
Owusu.
The old Owusu back.
The old Owusu. What was it?
Not the Owusu president.
Okay, so back to this chart, essentially, to bring us within debt policy limits for the potential impact of our current borrowing on the 2021 budget, we're looking at probably having to do $8.5 million worth of cuts. Because you need to bring it down by about $850,000, and as Darius has said, it's basically for every $100,000. For every $1 million, you're basically paying $100,000.
$100,000 in annual payments.
I don't see a way.
I would not agree with that assessment, that we would be going that far in debt policy.
What?
I don't know that we would be going, you'd have to make $8 million of cuts to be compliant with the debt policy.
And why is that?
Well, number one, every bond authorization that's passed by this council is compliant with debt policy, number one. And I think that everything, my calculation that I had before, I think it had gotten us within the figure, especially if you consider the effectiveness of the streetlight bonding and the effect that costs.
Yeah.
And we did the discussion over whether or not actual revenue producing, borrowing, bonding that produces revenue in terms of the landfill, or if it produces savings in terms of the streetlights. And you can have that discussion. I'm just stating that's my.
So that would require a change to the debt policy to do that.
I don't believe so, but again, the debt policy itself, everything that's passed by the council is compliant with the debt policy. So if you go past the 10% figure, it's still compliant with the debt policy. Whether or not, the decision of the body is to do that is a different story. But that's my view on it.
Okay, so let's put it this way. To stay within the 10% limit of debt service going forward, if we want to keep to that 10%, which is generally what most municipalities have adopted, and most municipalities, if you talk to them,
yes.
most municipalities look to not constantly be up against that 10%, but to be below it, because you want to be able to have borrowing for emergencies. What is not in the 5-year plan right now are things like $850,000 for Upper New Scotland reconfiguration that was just essentially decided that is the appropriate way to deal with the traffic issues there. It doesn't include anything additional for Lincoln Park master plan, which, I loved some of the stuff that was in that master plan to actually make that an attractive functioning park, but there's nothing in there for that. And even assuming we get grants, again, we're probably looking at being, having to chip in something for that. So it only has this one piece, but the 5-year plan has nothing more on that. There's discussions about the fact that we need to build a courthouse, replace the current courthouse. That's been going on for a number of years. In this debt schedule time period, I would fully expect that we're going to be essentially told we need to bite the bullet. Again, we can probably argue the state needs to help us out. The general policy is that we build it, they staff it. And they pay for our police officers, etc. There's no money in this for significant settlements of lawsuits, and I think that realistically we have to anticipate that there's going to be that kind of thing. So those are some of the kinds of big expenses that you should be under your debt policy. You should be under the 10% in order so that when you're doing that, when you have the cushion to be able to, you have the flexibility to be able to address real, true emergencies and unexpected spending. I was told by a couple people that going above the 10%, you start looking at that also adversely affecting your bond rating.
Again, generally speaking, yes, but not where it is being used to incur cost savings or to reduce essentially the expenditure side, which is what the landfill debt is for, and what also the streetlight debt is for.
So we could make an argument when DGS is buying new vehicles, it's cutting down on its maintenance costs.
You could.
And I think that that's a little bit of a slippery slope. The other thing is, here's the thing is the reason why you want to limit your debt policy is because it is an inflexible, absolute obligation that you have as a municipality. So what has happened here is we have taken an obligation that we've had of $4 million for street lighting that was in the operating budget side, and we've moved about, I think it's 2.3 million.
Thereabouts,
yeah. Yeah, to the debt policy side. It was 4 million fixed here, 2.3 is fixed over here, along with some maintenance costs and ongoing electricity costs over here. So the impact on, so what has been suggested is the full $2.3 million should be deducted from debt policy. That doesn't make sense because you still have, it's an obligation that has gone from the operating side to this side. It's only the savings part, which we haven't clearly defined yet because we don't have a maintenance contract on that. And we also don't know what our total costs are for the capital improvements on it because we're not done with the project. Could come in under the 26 million we've borrowed, could come in over, etc. kind of thing. So that's
discussion.
But $500,000 million house.
well. So there's something like if you move the police vehicles to the operating side, you are not cutting out the purchase of the police vehicles. This year you fund it potentially out of question. Can we, since we have at the end of this year, we will have more money left in debt reserve. Can we use more debt reserve to help pay for debt service,
Yes.
which then frees up
Yes.
maybe another $800,000, $900,000 to pay for the patrol cars and unmarked vehicles, cash 2020, and then we have.
That's possible depending on what else comes up in the budget for next year. So yes, the short answer.
Well, I'm talking about for 2020.
That's, as am I. If contracts get settled or if unexpected sources of revenue don't come in, or expected sources of revenue don't come to fruition, or unexpected increases in costs, then you're kind of in a hole where you may not be able to purchase those cars that you thought you could by finagling the debt service and the debt reserve offset of that.
But we could, oh, so you're thinking that the debt reserve issue that I just proposed might be a fallback position for some of what occurs in 2020?
You don't know. If that's a worst.
We
case.
haven't done that in the
That's
past.
a worst case. That's a worst case scenario. Yeah. It does provide a
But if we
cushion,
did- if
but
we-
it also impacts our going back to the bond rating and going back to the fiscal stress. It also impacts that because we're still not at the 20% level
Oh, I know.
for the fund balance. So
Right.
and the 20% level is the inclusion of the restricted fund balance. 10% unrestricted.
So
20%.
there is, Ms. Fahey has pointed out to me that our increasing unappropriated fund balance is an argument against us getting the full amount of the capital city funding. When we are looking at continuing to borrow, in my opinion, in excess of what we should be borrowing, looking at future generations, that puts additional stress there if we were to actually use some of that fund balance to help sort of getting some of the things that we shouldn't be borrowing from off that side of the ledger. It helps us with our debt service overall. I mean, it doesn't change that much in the budget other than we're getting rid of interest, which is a prudent thing to do. And also getting rid of, frankly, the issue of most people agreeing that we're bonding for something that we really shouldn't be bonding as a policy. I say most people. Certainly the OSC is of that opinion that it's most prudent and other people I'm talking to, in other municipalities.
If we're finished with the
Yep.
discussion here, there's two things I want to just let everybody know. One is that we're looking no later than January 23, the meeting for January 23 to have the bonding authorizations completed. We've discussed it. I think it's probably not going to be an issue. The other one, and I thought this was actually going to be on the agenda today, but on Monday you'll also have the levies in front of you to vote on, which will include the re-levies. You'll notice that the waste collection fee is not among them for next year, and that's because we've elected not to re-levy the waste collection fees for next year because we still have 4,000 outstanding payments that have not been made. And we have, this whole process has been quite much more onerous, I think, on my office than we had realized or expected. And one of the, I can explain the reasons why I think that we still have 4,000 unpaid bills. We only have 2,000 unpaid property tax bills at this point.
Right.
So it's a little bit incongruous, I think. But it's going to provide us an opportunity to make sure that we are giving everyone an opportunity to pay their waste collection fee from 2019 before we levy on the tax bill from 2021. We will also go through the waste collection fee bills for 2020 as scheduled. And this year I think it's going to be much easier and much earlier.
So we're still going to send out notices to collect
Yes.
next year's, whatever.
We're sending out next year's.
But we're not
and
expecting the
past
county
years.
to reimburse us until maybe the following year.
2021, yes.
Okay, I got it.
Yeah. It's going to, frankly, it'll relieve a lot of headaches for you. Because you're the ones who are going to get the calls when people have their waste collection fee re-levied onto their bill. And I had an exemption. It never should have been on here. And, this isn't mine. And you never sent me the bill and blah, 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 blah. There's a whole lot of reasons. One of the things we've discovered is that the ARPAS, the real property database, has not been as efficient. We've known this for years, but I think we finally figured out why. It's not as up-to-date and accurate as it should be for people's property addresses. And one of the things we've been doing in the last several months is taking actually information from the water department, which we did not fully understand until now, has the most updated information, moving that into ARPAS and then getting the bills out to people in the right way. So it's been an administrative burden, but we'll be solving that. So if anybody has any questions on the re-levies, you can let me know.
So that was not on our agenda because it has not been introduced and therefore was not committed to committee, and it's
Right.
not going to be, I hope,
You can't.
Right.
right? Because you need
I'm
it
saying,
passed
we
on.
need it to be passed by Monday, yeah.
Right, right.
Because the
So-
county is also passing its resolutions on Monday. And everyone needs to pass their resolution so we can actually produce a tax bill.
Yes, that's a good thing.
Yes.
Yeah. So does anybody have
Do you
any,
need that, but if they're passing theirs on Monday, the same night as our meeting on Monday, do we need to pass ours before they? Or is it, they get incorporated in, or?
We provide the figures, as long as no one has a problem with the figures that we're providing, no amendments are made, then they work off the same data. I think at this point, there really is,
But we don't technically have to pass ours before they pass?
there's not only there's a time requirement, yours has to pass first before they pass theirs. There's no requirement that I'm aware of, and I've discussed it with the county as well, and they said this situation has happened in the past, and it's been worked out this way. Frankly, we would have had it passed, last Monday, but for the storm.
right? So one of the things I want to just note for everybody, or ask you, so the question I've raised with regard to the idea of including savings in a debt policy as an offset is I had Jared take a look, see if he could find any debt policies, just in general finding debt policies to see where we're at and whether ours, made sense. And he provided me with a lot of links to a lot of different ones, and I asked him specifically to look for ones where there would be a savings offset, and the only one I think he found was Portland, Oregon, but at the same time, Portland, Oregon has a 7% cap on its debt service as compared to the budget. So this has been a topic of discussion, and I've noted, show me. So, show me the money.
Kansas. I found one for Kansas.
Sorry.
You found one in Kansas.
Yeah, I think I forwarded the link to you, where for
To me?
state debt. I think so, yeah.
I don't recall.
Okay. But I found one where they actually.
If you
take that
could,
into
maybe,
consideration.
I think you might have mentioned me, I don't know if you sent me a link, but what do I know? I get so many emails in a day. Any other questions, anything else that anybody wants me to follow through on here?
Nope.
We do have a couple things, I think, that are not too difficult cuts in this budget, but it's a challenge. I will be following through on the questions that people have asked here, and come ready to make decisions on the 19th. All right? Oh, we are adjourned.